Hello guys and welcome to today's session. Today we are going to talk about the various kinds of enrollments we can possibly do to Intune. Alright, so let's just take a look over today's agenda first. This is going to be one of the shorter sessions and I'm going to just introduce you guys the various kinds of enrollments you can do to Intune of various operating system, may that be Android, iOS, Windows or Mac. And we will also talk about what are the various prerequisites that needs to be there in place in order to facilitate the enrollment. This is going to be a level 100 kind of a video, so if you want to know a deep dive, there are separate sessions and separate nuggets on each of them. You might want to refer to that, but this nugget is just to give you guys a head start. Okay, all right, so now that being said, let's just get started. The first kind of enrollment that we are going to discuss is iOS. So if we have an iOS device and if you want to facilitate its enrollment to Intune, there are three possible ways we can do it. First is the manual enrollment. This way of enrollment is usually done for BYOD kind of a device, bring your own device kind of a scenario, or personal devices. The way we do it is we install the company portal application in the iOS device, we log into it, we enter our username and password, and the device gets enrolled to Intune. The only thing that needs to be there in place is the user needs to have a Intune license. The second way of enrolling an iOS device to Intune is via the DEP program or device enrollment program. And this DEP program is introduced by Apple. It's a feature of Apple which is used for bulk enrollment of iOS devices to Intune. There are some additional prerequisites which needs to be taken care of in case of DEP. Like along with an APNS, we need to set up a DEP token, we need to set up a DEP profile, and we need to have the serial number of all the devices. We'll talk, there's a separate nugget on DEP, on setting up of DEP and leveraging DEP. You might want to refer to that. But for now, just know that if it's a corporate device, we might as well enroll a device as a DEP device and leverage this functionality of Apple. And the third and last way of enrolling an iOS device to Intune is via Apple Configurator. Apple Configurator is a software that needs to be installed on a Mac device. So in order to go with this approach, we need to have a Mac OS with us, and we install the Apple Configurator, we create an enrollment profile, and then we move that, or then we copy that enrollment profile directly to the iOS device. So the iOS device needs to be attached via USB to the Mac device wherein the Apple Configurator is running. The last approach is not very widely used. I've rarely seen any organization making use of the Apple Configurator approach, but just know that this is one of the possible ways as well. If we talk about the prerequisite, well, for manual enrollment, the end user needs to have an iOS device and needs to have the company portal application in his device. He needs to have a Intune license assigned to him. That can be an Intune A-Direct license, or the EMS E3 or the E5 suite, which contains the Intune license. And well, as we are already aware that any MDM provider cannot directly talk with the Apple devices or the Mac devices. There is a man in the middle, which is the APNS, that's Apple Push Notification Service. So the MDM service speaks to the APNS and the APNS speaks to the iOS or the Mac device. This is an additional layer of security which iOS has provided. So in order to set up the APNS, we need to have an Apple ID. So these are the things that needs to be kept in mind if we want to facilitate a manual enrollment of iOS device to Intune. Intune license, obviously, an Apple ID which is needed to set up the APNS, and for setting up of APNS there are some steps that needs to be followed, which is a one-time thing. You need to have an Apple ID. It can be a personal or business, well, but just make sure that the Apple certificate that is created is valid for 1 year. Then if you end up renewing it, you will be having access to you will be needing access to the same Apple ID to renew it. Therefore, the recommendation is making use of a business Apple ID. Okay, the next way is DEP. DEP, as I already said, is a program by Apple, and it is used to facilitate bulk enrollment of iOS devices to Intune. This is usually used for corporate devices and not for personal devices. And as I say, already said, there's a different session on this different nugget on DEP. You might want to refer to that. But if we talk about the prerequisite, obviously the Intune license needs to be there. Apple ID needs to be there in order to create the APNS. And in this case, we need to have access to the Apple Business Manager portal as well. Because this is a corporate program by Apple, you need to have access to the Apple Business Manager. Once you log into the Apple Business Manager, you have to create another token just like just like we did in case of manual enrollment, and we created the APNS. We have to create the DEP token as well. Once we do that, then another prerequisite is we need to have the serial number of all the DEP devices that we are going to manage, and those serial numbers are uploaded in the DEP token, in the DEP profile. And lastly, we have to create the DEP profile. The serial numbers are uploaded not in the DEP profile, they are uploaded in the Apple Business Manager. And the DEP profile is something wherein we configure what exactly the end user experience is going to be. We can in a way configure the out of the box experience, along with that how exactly the device is going to be configured while it is being enrolled to Intune. So DEP, just keep in mind, is one of the other viable approaches as well. However, for that, you need to enroll to the Apple Business Manager program, and you need to have the DEP token and the serial number of the devices you may want to manage. And lastly, the approach that we have is using the Apple Configurator. As already said, Apple Configurator is a software that we can install in Mac device. And then the way we leverage this feature is we need to have a Mac device, we need to install the Apple Configurator, and then we need to physically attach the iOS device that we are going to enroll to that Mac device, make some configurations in the Apple Configurator, copy it to the iOS device, and then we should be good to go. And the prerequisites for this setup is obviously an Intune service, an Intune license, a Mac device, physical access to the phone, Apple Configurator in the Mac device, which needs to be installed. It's a piece of software, and the APNS service, which obviously is a mandate or a prerequisite in order to facilitate enrollment of any iOS or Mac device to any MDM service. Okay, all right. Or just keep this in mind while you're going ahead with enrollment of any iOS device or Mac device to Intune. Okay, all right. The next bifurcation that we have is for Windows device. And if you have a Windows device which you want to enroll to Intune, there are 5 possible ways we can do it from. We can do a manual enrollment, auto enrollment, GPO, AutoPilot, or co-management. Well, let's just get the 1,000 feet overview of what exactly all these are. Manual enrollment, this is done by, if you have a Windows 10 machine, may that be on the domain or may that be in the work group. If you go to Start Settings, Access Work or School, and instead of clicking Connect, if you go on the right hand side, there should be a hyperlink saying Enroll Only in Device Management. If you click on that, enter your username, password, your device will be enrolled to Intune. What does not happen in this case is Azure AD registration. The device only gets enrolled to Intune but does not get Azure AD registered. However, the other way of enroll, that's the first way. The second way is doing auto enrollment. So for auto enrollment, the end user has to go to Start and then Settings, Access Work or School. He has to click on Connect, enter his username and password. What happens is the device gets enrolled, the device gets Azure AD registered. Once the device is Azure AD registered, if we have set up something called the MDM scope for the user who has done the Azure AD registration, the device gets automatically enrolled to Intune. So clicking on Connect does not do a enrollment to Intune. It only does an Azure AD registration. Depending upon the MDM scope set, the device gets enrolled. The third option that we have is group policy. So if the machines are joined to the on-prem domain, then we can enroll them to Intune using group policy as well. Well, the group policy again is going to do an Azure registration. So the MDM scope needs to be set appropriately, just like we did in the previous case, and the device will get enrolled to Intune. The fourth option is used for bulk deployment. It is called AutoPilot. So just like we were talking about DEP for iOS, we have got AutoPilot for Windows. It does the task of Azure AD join as well as enrolling to Intune. So similarly, we have some other prerequisite that needs to be taken care of, just like we were in case of iOS for DEP. We need to have the serial number or the hardware hash of the devices. And just like we were creating a DEP profile, we have to create an AutoPilot profile as well, wherein we configure how exactly the end user experience is going to be out of the box when she powers on the device for the very first time. And the last option that we have is enrolling a Windows 10 device to Intune using co-management, that is using SCCM. So SCCM is a piece of software we must already be familiar, that is used to manage Windows 10 devices, or I mean Windows devices from a central point of view, from a central repository. So we can leverage SCCM as well, and use it to enroll devices to Intune, so that we don't need something like a group policy. Okay. All right. Now let's just talk about the prereqs. So for manual enrollment or enroll only in device management option, the end user needs to have an Intune license. It can be an Intune A Direct license, or it can be an EMS E3 or an E5 license. So EMS E3 or E5 is part of a suite, and that suite contains the Intune license. And the devices needs to be running with an operating system Windows 10 1607 or later. We don't need any company portal application to install because the broker is already embedded in the operating system. For auto enroll, obviously we need an Intune license, which is going to be mandate. The devices needs to be running with 1607 or later, and the MDM scope needs to be set for the user who is doing the auto enrollment. The device will be Azure AD registered and then enrolled to Intune if the MDM scope was set for the user. For group policy enrollment, the user needs to have an Intune license, A Direct or EMS Suite. The Windows version needs to be, the build version needs to be 1709 or later. Please keep in mind. The MDM scope needs to be set for the user. Obviously, if we are doing an enrollment via group policy, a group policy will be targeted to an organizational unit. So the device needs to be the part of the organizational unit wherein the group policy has been created and targeted. And most importantly, the prerequisite is that the machine needs to be hybrid Azure AD joined. That is, the device needs to be joined to the on-prem domain in order to deploy the group policy, and it needs to be joined to the Azure as well, hence bringing it to a state of hybrid Azure AD join. The hybrid Azure AD join configuration is done by using a tool called Azure AD Connect, which we have discussed in the later nuggets. Okay, all right. And the next way of enrolling a device to a Windows 10 device to Intune is by the AutoPilot program. As I already said, AutoPilot for Windows is same as DEP for iOS. And in case of AutoPilot, the device ends up getting Azure AD joined. Therefore, an Intune license will not suffice. We need to have a Azure AD Premium license as well, which is a part of the EMS suite. The Windows build version needs to be 1703 or later. So please keep in mind we have the correct Windows version. And just like in case of DEP devices, we were uploading the serial number to the Apple Business Manager portal. In this case, we have to upload the hardware hash of the device, which is just like a serial number, to Intune. Again, I've done a separate nugget on AutoPilot. You might want to refer to that for more details. Moving on, the MDM scope for the user needs to be set correctly because the device is going to be Azure AD registered, and then if the MDM scope was set, the device will be enrolled to Intune. An AutoPilot profile needs to be created as well. which is just like creating the DEP profile. In this AutoPilot profile, we determine what exactly the out-of-the-box experience of the user is going to be. So when we do AutoPilot, there are two ways of doing AutoPilot. We can either do a hybrid Azure AD join AutoPilot, or we can do a normal AutoPilot. Again, there are separate nuggets on each of them, so you might want to refer to them for more details on which one to use and when. But the 1,000 feet overview is, in case of normal AutoPilot, the device only gets Azure AD joined and enrolled to Intune. However, in case of hybrid Azure AD join AutoPilot, the device gets joined to the on-prem domain as well as to the Azure. There are some additional prerequisites that needs to be taken care of in order to facilitate an hybrid Azure AD join AutoPilot. We need to set up something called an ODJ connector. The device needs to be in direct line of sight with the domain controller, and we have to create something called a domain join profile, wherein we mention the name of the domain controller and the organizational unit wherein the computer object is going to be created. We also have, when we are making an AutoPilot profile, may that be normal or may that be hybrid, we can select self-deploying or user-driven. For self-deploying, the device needs to have a TPM chip, so it needs to be a physical machine. So just know that AutoPilot is also one of the ways of enrolling a device to Intune, and this is usually used for corporate devices, and the device needs to be system reset, or it needs to be a fresh device being powered on for the very first time. All right, so the next way of enrolling a device to Windows 10 device to Intune is via SCCM. So when a device has the SCCM client and when we enroll it to Intune, it brings the device to the state of being co-managed. That is, it is being managed via 2MDM, Intune, and SCCM at the same point of time. Okay. There's a separate nugget on co-management. You might want to refer to that. But for now, in order to facilitate co-management, we need to have a Windows 10 version of 1709 or later. Obviously, if the device is being managed via SCCM, then the device was joined to the on-prem domain. Intune license needs to be there. It can be Intune ADirect, or it can be a part of the EMS suite. The MDM scope needs to be set for the user. This is for a user-based enrollment. We have a device-based enrollment as well. But I mean, if you're doing a user-based enrollment, that is, if the device is going to be attributed to a user, then, and not a user-less device, then the MDM scope needs to be set. Just like in the case of the previous approach, the device needs to be hybrid Azure AD joined. That is, needs to be joined to the on-prem domain as well as the Azure, and that is again done by using a tool called Azure AD Connect, wherein we make that determination or configuration. The SCCM version needs to be 1710 or later, and well, obviously we don't have to configure co-management for the entire tenant. We can do it for a group of devices first and then take the approach forward. So if we are doing it as a group of devices first, then we have to create a collection of those devices in SCCM and then enable co-management for that collection. So we need to have a collection of devices. And finally, we don't need any group policy in this case. There doesn't need to be any group policy, or specifically no conflicting group policy, and SCCM will take care of enrolling the device. So the way SCCM does is the same way group policy would do. It would create a scheduled task and it would already register the device, and if the MDM scope is correctly set, the device would be enrolled to Intune. Okay. All right, now let's just talk about Android devices. So Android devices can be managed via Intune from Android version 4.0 or later, and there are two broad segregation or two broad categories by which we can enroll an Android device. So it's not device specific, so the same device can be enrolled via the two ways, but it is a determination which the admin makes and not the end user. So the admin can decide whether an Android device gets enrolled as an Android device admin or as Android enterprise. Android device, I again have done a separate nugget on both of them, but just again a 1,000 feet overview. In case of Android device, the entire device is managed by Intune. So it's not a very good approach in case of a BYOD kind of a scenario. And in case of Android enterprise, what we do is something called containerization of data. So in the device, we create a container. You might refer to this as the corporate container, and there is the rest of the device is the personal container. So the corporate container is what the Intune admin will manage, and that container is encrypted. There are many other advantages as well of making use of Android Enterprise, but the main segregation or the main underlying thing, that the concept that differentiates the two is, in case of Android Enterprise, we do containerization of data and we just maintain the container. Therefore, it's a very good approach in case of BYOD kind of a scenario. Again, Android device admin is a legacy method and Google is set to decommission it very soon. So Android Enterprise would be the way forward. Now let's just talk about a scenario wherein the device is not a BYOD but a company owned device, and we want to enroll it as an Android Enterprise. In that case, if it's a company owned device, there won't be any personal container, and the corporate container would be the only container in the device. So I mean, it's just the same as the previous case, but in this case what we would do is we would shrink the personal container, and the only container that would be there in the device would be the corporate container. So the device is fully managed. So this device owner is used for fully managed devices or company owned devices. Now if this company space is running with only one application, then this kind of setup is called COSU, or company owned single use. It is kind of a kiosk device that you would usually see in theaters while you're going to book your tickets, which runs with only one application, like Book My Show or something like that. And if it is running with multiple applications, then it is Kobo, or company owned business only. The device in both the cases is fully managed. Okay, so just various flavors of enrolling a device, Android device to Intune, but the main segregation is whether you are doing Android device admin or whether you are doing Android enterprise. Whichever you do is determined by the Intune admin, and he does that while he makes a device enrollment restriction profile. Okay. All right, so let's just talk about the prerequisites. If it's a BYOD device, the end user obviously needs to have an Intune license. It can be Intune A Direct or EMS Suite, and the Android version needs to be 5.1 or later, and the device restriction needs to be set accordingly. So if you're doing a BYOD, then the device restriction needs to be set so that the end user is not ending up enrolling it as a device admin, but he is doing it as a BYOD device. Okay. For COSU, there is just one additional thing that needs to be done, and that is a COSU enrollment is done not by entering username and password, but by scanning a QR code. So just another way of getting yourself authenticated, and that is scanning the QR code. Intune license and Android version remain the same, and device restriction needs to be there accordingly. And as I said, corporate owned single use. So if this device is kind of a kiosk device, runs with limited application, so that application needs to be whitelisted. So whatever we are not whitelisting, other than that, everything does not show. Only those applications show in the device which are whitelisted. And Kobo again is just like COSU, but it is not stuck to just running of one application. This is also fully managed. It is also done using the QR code. And in this case, instead of the company portal application, there is a Microsoft Intune app that runs the device. Okay, this feature has been recently released. Other than that, everything remains the same. The need of Intune license and the device restrictions set accordingly, and the operating system version. Okay. All right. And lastly, we have the Mac enrollment. So just like an iOS enrollment, we can enroll a Mac device also to Intune, and there are two ways. We can do it manually, wherein we install the company portal application, or we can use the DEP program. In case of manual enrollment, the end user needs to have an Intune license, and that's all. Obviously, the APNS needs to be there in place, as it's the man in the middle. In case of DEP, the additional requirement are obviously the Intune admin will, just like in case of iOS, the Intune admin will have to set up the DEP profile. He will have to enter the serial number in the Apple Business Manager program portal, and he will have to create the DEP token as well in addition. So that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, that's all I wanted to brief you guys about. I mean, the aim, I know this has been quite a short one comparing to the nuggets that follow, but the main comparing to the nuggets that follow, but the main aim of introducing you guys to the enrollment flow and the types of enrollment was giving you guys a head start so that we know that what are the different kind of operating system we can enroll to Intune. That's pretty much all apart from Unix and Windows Server Edition. And if we choose a specific approach of enrolling a device to Intune, then what is going to be the prerequisite for each of them? So that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, the nuggets to follow will actually be deep dive on if we end up choosing any of them, may that be DEP, co-management, group policy, then how exactly to set it up, and it's going to be a visual demonstration. So I hope that this has been informative for you guys. I would like to thank you for viewing. This is your friend Saurabh Sarkar signing off.